Good evening. Welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Welcome to Debate Night. Tonight, we have a debate between a liberal hawk and a conservative hawk. We've got capitalist Neocon here in the studio. We've been having this debate in the works for a little while now, and capitalist Neocon reached out to me and has a few areas of disagreement, particularly regarding World War I, World War II, and divorce that we're going to talk about tonight, though we have other disagreements and we may, of course, debate those at a future occasion. However, for the sake of time, we're going to be talking about three different subjects tonight. So, because capitalist Neocon here is the challenger, he'll get to go first on each of the three subjects. But before we begin, you can find capitalist Neocon over on Twitter at CNeocon. And is there anywhere else that the people can find you?
Pretty much for Twitter, that's it, at least for now. But if I do add other media, I'll just post it on there and pin the tweet.
Gotcha. And then feel free to also introduce yourself to my audience here, because in case people don't know you yet.
Okay, so I'm capitalist Neocon, and I would say like post World War II, I agree a lot with Kevin for the need of America and Western countries to be hawkish on the world stage. And it's not just enough to like say to the world, who cares what happens? It's halfway over there, because what happens in one place affects everywhere else. But at least for the first topic for World War One, this is where like I would disagree, because World War One and World War Two, they're like among the so-called good wars out there. While I think it was a mistake for both of them of going against the Germans, and in both cases siding with the Russians to go against the Germans.
Okay, well, that's pretty controversial, and of course, I disagree on that. But yeah, this is debate night, so you get to make your case. So we'll start with World War I. So you got a few minutes to kind of make your case on that. You believe that it wasn't worth it for the United States to get involved, and I guess the only sort of question that I would have just to prompt this is your position. Is that in hindsight, given all that happened, or would you, in the run up to it, still have opposed it, or do you think it made sense at the time, but in hindsight it doesn't really make sense? What's your general position on this issue? And yeah, feel free to make your case.
Okay, well, I would say both for it then. And the main reason, let's see, I have some notes here then that I can cite more specifically for World War One then. But anyways, with World War One, like it was a war where there were 40 that occurred. And in the case of the US and UK deciding to join the war, is the UK debt before the war, it was around 25% of its economy. After the war, it was under 85% of its economy. With the US, it was only around 8% of its economy. After the war, it was 32%. So one factor is just that it was way too costly then. And the other thing, as far as the idea of Germany being a major threat, to me, when the Russian Revolution happened and when the communists took over, at least to me, I think communists are a greater threat than the German Empire at the time. So I think among intervention, because I'm not like the America First crowd, I don't just say don't do anything about it. Like I actually would have sided with the Germans insofar as to defeat the Russians after the Russian Revolution, or to at least thwart the Russian Revolution to the degree the US and the UK could. And among remaining money left, then, like for the military, just because I don't think as much should have been spent, some of it could have been spent towards British colonies or Latin American countries to get them oriented towards the US and the UK. So I'm not saying the US just should have done nothing, but I think going against the Germans was a mistake.
I see. So you wouldn't regard then, say, the attack on the Lusitania or their aggression in Europe as necessarily warranting American aggression. You would just basically say that's Europe's problem, and we're just going to do our own thing. Basically, that would be what you would have suggested Wilson do. Is that right?
Well, I would just say, like with each country, there's a finite amount of resources that can spend. And at least to me, the Russian Revolution or like the rise of communism is a much greater threat than whatever the German Empire posed to Europe then.
And why do you say that? Because of course we know how history went, and the Soviet Union went on to be a massive threat. But back in 1917, 1918, they were in a big civil war that lasted a few years. They weren't that formidable outside of their own country, whereas Germany, in contrast at the time, was invading countries left and right in Europe, literally. So I would categorize in that era Germany to actually be a far bigger threat than the Bolsheviks, at least on an international level. But that's just me.
Yeah, but I just think like with the like threat that communism, as you pointed later out, would pose to the world, like is it's best to take preemptive action where you can take out the problem early rather than just waiting for them to grow and grow and grow and say, oh, well, let's take out Germany first and like borrow all this money. And then, oh, we can't fight the Russians as well.
Well, there was an effort made to undermine the Bolshevik Revolution, the Civil War, and I mean, even Canada sent troops over there. The problem is a lot of the strategy was bungled. A lot of it was dedicated to sending too few troops to peripheral areas that weren't adequately able to support the white forces where it mattered. And I actually agree that there should have been a far bigger Western involvement to side with the whites against the Bolsheviks. I would agree with that for sure, but I don't believe that it would have risen to the extent that you say you just ignore Germany. Because if we imagine a world like that where you do put in a lot more resources against the Red Army still maybe wins. And now, in that case, you've got a very belligerent and consolidated Soviet Union as well as Germany that's taken over basically the continent, and now Germany going forward is going to be so much more of a military threat because unlike where they were in World War II, where they had to recover from all the loss of World War I, instead of having that decade plus of economic hardship that undermined their military capacity, now they've had 30 years of a continent basically for industrial base, a military power. Now, when they come and invade America in the 40s, now they might actually be able to pull it off. And I believe that Germany always had the technological advantage over the US at the time and the Soviet Union, especially. And it's very clear to me that, and we can get into this in the World War II debate, but that I believe that had the U.S. worked with Germany, for example, against the Soviets, the new Cold War against Germany that would have followed after might have gone in the German direction more favorably than the Soviets, because we know that the Americans and the Soviets both used German scientists that defected in the tail end of the war as their assets. But in this world where we work with Germans against the Russians, now they keep all their scientists. Now they can nuke us and we don't have jack shit. That would be a big problem. And so for me, just looking at how things played out, I think we went with the better option because the Soviets wound up losing the Cold War. I don't know if Nazi Germany would have lost the Cold War given how much more technologically advantageous they were in terms of their scientific base. I mean, the only reason the Soviets really had very much at all was just because of German scientists. They wouldn't have had those. So Germany would have. So, but I know that's diverging a little bit from the World War I topic, but you mentioned the greater threat of communism. I don't believe that the communists were a bigger threat than the German Empire until after the Second World War, personally.
Okay, but would you say if, let's say like Germany conquers a piece of territory or the German Empire at the time versus the Russia conquers a piece of territory, like which do you think is a greater threat to the world?
At which time? We're talking post-Bolshevik Revolution, but pre-Hitler, is that right?
Like, how about just post-revolution then? Like if Russia decided to take a piece of land versus Germany decided to take a piece of land, which would be a greater threat in your mind then?
But you cut out for a little bit at the start. So you're talking post the Bolshevik Revolution, but pre-World War II. Is that right?
Yeah,
So,
pre-World War II, like German Empire and
yeah.
like Russia post like
Yeah.
Russian Revolution, like if they took a piece of land,
Yeah.
which one to you would be a greater threat?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So for me, obviously, it'd be Germany. I mean, the Soviet Union was in absolute disarray. They were an economic mess until basically the 1930s. Germany, in contrast, had they not had to deal with American retaliation, had they not had to deal with the absolute overwhelming power of the American army, if they were just free to keep on taking land after land and build up their industrial base and everything, there's no doubt in my mind that they would have won World War One. They would have consolidated power across Europe, and that going forward, in contrast to the Russians, which were in shambles, it, it it's not beyond it's not beyond reasonable speculation to infer that the Germans might have actually invaded the Soviet Union before 1941 and actually succeeded and won, in which case, oh shit, now we have to deal with a Germany that's united, has economic capacity from Portugal to the Pacific Ocean, and they've got all the scientists. There's no way they don't get the nukes first, then, in my view. But that's just me. I think that they would have won the world eventually if that had happened. So I would say Germany.
Okay, but one thing is you said, like, as far as Russia, it was in shambles, and that's true. Or like in my notes, I do have statistics there, like, and you probably know this as well, that like in Germany, like in their economy, both in terms of GDP and GDP per capita, it was much greater than Russia. But doesn't that kind of prove the point that you would try to contain a system that fails its citizens more, rather than contain a system which fails its citizens less? Because if
No,
life is better for people under Germany than it is under Russia, then why are you going after the German Empire rather than a state which fails its people? Wouldn't you want to contain a state which fails its people first?
No, I absolutely not, because both of their ideologies were evil. And so for me, I look at that and I say, well, we're going to have to fight the one that wins. So let's try to keep them both as weak as possible, as opposed to, in this case, if we work with the upper dog against the underdog, if we work with the Germans against the Russians, now when the Germans come for us, like they didn't have to deal with us, so the opportunity cost is in reverse now. They're even stronger than they would have been in World War II. There's no doubt in my mind that when we have to do war with them, they're actually going to be in a stronger position than the Soviets were in the Cold War, where in the Soviets, they had to fight the Germans and most of their energy was directed into that front, and it really held them back from fighting America. If America had gone in right from the get-go in the World War I era, or shortly thereafter, against the Bolsheviks, what it would have done was it basically would have signed off on us saying, we're going to endorse a rival power that's already attacked our assets and killed our people. We're going to endorse them, not just taking Europe, but taking Siberia. We're going to endorse them having an industrial power base spanning from Gibraltar to the Chukchi Peninsula, 15,000 kilometers of land, hundreds of millions of people, and they've got the scientists, and they've got as you mentioned, a way higher GDP per capita. I got news. A higher GDP per capita country is a harder military threat in the long run to deal with than a lower GDP country. It's kind of like saying, would you rather fight China now or back in the 70s under Mao? Well, it would have been easier to take them down under Mao. And so that's the problem, is that you're going to have to do war with them eventually, or at least the Cold War. I'd rather do a Cold War with a poorer country. I'd rather have the poor one be the enemy. I'd rather work to keep them both down than endorse one to just take over everything and then have them come over and kick our asses in 20 or 30 years. That'd be my view.
But yet, like, if you do side with the Russians, like, you do make them stronger then. And like, you're siding with a power where it can't take care
and then
of
they
its
use that
citizens as
against
much.
Germany. They use that against Germany. It's basically dual containment, essentially. They both kill each other so that when you do have to fight them, they're weaker. They're both weaker.
But the thing is, with that strategy of like, let's fight the Germans and the Russians, like my question is I cited earlier and I can cite it again, like the debt to GDP statistics of Britain and the US. Like, unless you believe in monetary policy or just like
Wait,
debts
you
don't
cut out.
matter.
You cut out. You cut out. Can you rephrase that? You cut out. I want to understand your argument.
Okay, so my question is, like you said, you would take on the Germans and the Russians, though not at the same time.
Well, the
Then,
Bolsheviks specifically. I think Russia before the Bolsheviks was a good ally against Germany. But yeah.
okay, but in terms of the U.S. and Britain, like fighting World War I, and I can cite the statistic I cited earlier about how it impacted the debt to GDP negatively for both. Like my question is, unless you believe in monetary policy or just like debts don't matter, like
Wait,
how
wait,
would
wait,
you?
wait, 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 wait. Hold on, hold on. So if I if I support one of the few functions of government, which is defense, which is the military, one of the few things that the government should be spending money on. I support the government making an investment in that. One of the few things the government should be making an investment in, because we can let individuals take care of other matters, but kind of hard to have an individual take down an empire. Yeah, kind of have the government do that. Um, I'm in the same camp now as Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. Are you aware that there are more economic persuasions than simply modern monetary policy and anarcho-capitalism?
Then I'm also in favor of high military spending. Like I think even the US, it can spend up to 10% of its economy on defense without having to borrow money. And so I'm not in favor of weak defense spending, but these wars went way over 10%. So, like, is your solution just let's borrow a ton of money, or is there a way to pay for these conflicts?
Yeah. So couple points about that. First is, so I talk about the wealth pill. What I want for all countries going forward is basically get out of debt as soon as possible, then set up a sovereign wealth fund. So the next time you do have an emergency come up, such as a war, you don't have to go into debt to pay for it. That would be the best way to manage the security situation, is to have a ton of money in a war chest waiting for the event of war. Now, obviously, in the run up to World War One, that hadn't been the case. And you're right that the US and the UK did have to borrow. However, it worked out. Look at the US and the UK today. Everything's good. So it's like, look, and I'm not endorsing debt per se. I'm not endorsing debt per se, but it kind of seemed to be a worthwhile investment. Like you talk about it as if it was the end of the world, but we're still here and we're based and nobody can challenge us. So that's to me, it seems like they made the right decision. The only criticism that I would have had is that there wasn't more money spent to also fight the Bolsheviks. But to me, in no way does that mean that we give the German Empire a pass to take over Europe just because communists are bad too. I would fight both of them. I think it was well within the capacity of the UK and the US to do both. Like, let's say the US and Britain both had to borrow more money and go 250% into debt. But to do so, they offered a bigger fight against the Russians as well, the Bolsheviks as well. And maybe on some chance, they actually managed to assist the whites in retaking power there. Well, the Cold War with Russia never would have happened. Russia today would look like the United Kingdom. They'd have a constitutional monarchy with a Tsar, and everybody would be rich. They'd have a democracy and everything. That'd be awesome. And you think about it, how much the Cold War cost us, how much it almost sent the world into a nuclear war. That would be a worthwhile expenditure. Just spend a little more. But you wouldn't actually have to go that far into debt, because what I would do is just raise taxes. Like, of course you raise taxes. It's a war. I mean, it's an emergency. Those don't happen all the time. So,
I
but what
mean,
do
well,
you
yeah,
think
I mean,
about
you can have high taxes, and even I'm for raising to pay for a strong national defense of around 10% of the economy. But these wars went way over 10% of the economy just on defense. Then,
it? Okay, but we were victorious. So,
I mean, well, we didn't contain the Russian Revolution. Then we contained Germany, but not Russia. So, I mean, if you're against both, that's one for two.
well, no, not necessarily. We also defeated the Soviets. It just took longer to get around to it. But you look at the world today, both were
Yeah, but at the
eventually defeated.
time, like, I mean, it wasn't guaranteed that you were going to defeat the Soviets. I mean, you could have easily had, let's say, like President Carter for 8 years, and then no Reagan comes on the scene and people say like, oh, who cares? It's halfway around the world. Then like there's definitely the possibility if you do a simulation of the world 100 times that in some cases because of the US siding with the Russians, guess what? The Soviet Union down the road actually wins the war.
Wait, you cut out like the last 10 seconds of that.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, if you do a simulation of the world, let's say 100 times, like, there's a chance by siding with the Russians that, like, later on the Soviet Union actually wins because it wasn't guaranteed that the US was going to have strong leadership. You could have easily had weak leadership.
Okay, but let's run that simulation too and say, do a Monte Carlo thing. You got 40,000 simulations you're going to run over. And let's just run that through and see how many times us siding with Germany instead of Russia results in Germany being the Cold War power. And Germany, of course, as you noted, a stronger economic power. And they had a lot more ingenuity on their side. To me, it seems like in most of those cases, it would have resulted in the Germans winning. It would have resulted in a Cold War with Germany. And I don't know what it is. Let's say it's 30%. Let's say it's 50% chance the Germans win that Cold War. And by the year 2000, the whole world is under the Nazi Party's hegemony, basically. Versus,
well, the Nazis came after World War
no.
I.
Well, the Nazis were going to come about sooner or later. We're
well,
talking
they came
about
about because of the well, they came about because of the Treaty of Versailles because Germany got humiliated.
Yeah, no,
the
that's
support that you wanted for the U.S. and Britain. Then
no, that's a surface
if
level
the US
analysis of it. No, that's a surface
there wouldn't
level.
Have been the Treaty of Versailles.
That's a surface level analysis of it because it ignores the rampant anti-Semitism that was present there to begin with. And yeah, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Russia too.
Well, it's not just anti-Semitism that led to the Nazis. I mean, part of it also was with the Treaty of Versailles. Like Germany was in a Great Depression then, and there was massive unemployment then. And I mean, during times of crisis, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but people do tend to go towards extreme candidates when, it's a time of crisis and they just see that the politicians can't help them out. And, their country got humiliated with the Treaty of Versailles.
So even if I grant you that the Nazi Party specifically doesn't come out of this, you're still going to have some basically quasi-fascist party come out of Germany as they take over Europe and everything down the road. There's no doubt in my mind that had they won World War I, and they had Russia basically, they had all this landmass. There's no doubt in my mind they would have then expanded and done World War II, of course, except the battle lines wouldn't have been with Poland. It would have been right off the bat invading Britain, going into the Middle East, going into Africa. They've already got Russia. It just seems to me that the Germans would have such a stronger position in World War II had they won World War I than the Soviets or the Germans had going into World War II. So the only question I got a couple questions now. So the first question will be, do you think that Germany winning World War I and then consolidating their power over that huge landmass, do you think that would be a more formidable opponent in the Cold War in the second half of the 20th century than the Soviet Union? And the second question
for me, if there is to be a Cold War, like in terms of the German Empire versus like Russia, like when the Bolsheviks took power, for me, I just view it as a lesser of two evil equation where like if one side is to take over territory or be expansionist, like I don't want communism spreading more so than the German Empire. So for me, because I view the German Empire as a lesser, and that's not to endorse everything they did, like there were a lot of problems. I'm not saying, this was like such a great place then, but I'm just saying like it was a lesser of two evil.
How was it a lesser of two evils? I'm not even saying they're not. I'm just asking you to specifically elucidate why Germany in say that era was better than Lenin's Bolsheviks. What made them a lesser evil? Because they were invading more countries at the time as well. So
I mean, well, one thing that we discussed is economically they could take care of their citizens much better. So I don't get this need of like, why would you side with a country that can't take care of its citizens and, have them increase in influence around the world in order to take out a country which can better take care of its citizens. Then, because to
Well,
me, it seems you go after the most dangerous ideologies first. And in the case of Russia, it was couldn't do as good as the Germans in taking care of their citizens.
but,
So thus,
but by
I
that
think those people should have been like liberated first.
by that logic, though, I would consider Maoism in the 1960s and 70s to be a more vile ideology than basically Khrushchev and Brezhnev's version of communism in the Soviet Union. But we worked with China against the Soviet Union because it was clear Soviets had 40,000 nukes, up to 40,000 nukes, and they were aiming them at us and China. And so China was somebody that you could work with. Would you regard Maoism as a worse ideology than Brezhnev and Khrushchev's communism?
I mean, well, for that, as far as like the Sino-Soviet dispute, then, I mean, I don't like either really, but like I would agree that like, because for me, in terms of siding with communists, really the only time I would side with them is in to take out other communists. So actually for that, because I just regard communism as a whole as an evil, and I kind of view them as two sides of the same coin, I do get the logic in that case of you side with the little guy to take out the big guy,
Yeah.
and you just want them to fight with each other continually.
Yes. But so I'm applying that logic to World War I basically and saying, well, you've already admitted that Germany would be a stronger threat to deal with after than the Russians would, because you've already said it. Now, I would disagree with the notion that they take care of their people better. It's like, okay, that's debatable. They were not like some great bastion of democracy or anything. They were definitely going to be an ideological enemy. And I'd rather fight a weaker ideological enemy that is economically incompetent than one that is more economically competent.
Well, let's see, for that point then, like I have notes and I can send it to you like after the debate, like as far as expectations go. So I'm not just like making numbers up. But in the case of Germany, then in 1910, this is GDP per capita. It's around 3,300. In the case of Russia, it's around 1,300. So that's a pretty big difference as far as who can take care of their citizens better.
It kind of looks like Germany's a more scary threat than the Russians.
But wouldn't you say like this, like Russia, because it can't of its citizens as well, it is a greater threat, and also
no,
like the
no,
threat
no,
that
no, no,
communism.
no. Germany was a bigger threat to American hegemony than Russia.
But what about
Russia
the threat
poor.
that
Dude,
communism?
Russia was poor. Russia was poor, dude. How was Russia a bigger threat? They couldn't do shit.
But wouldn't you say, like when the Bolsheviks took over, that communism is a great threat to the world that does need to be contained?
No, they were deeply impoverished, and they fought a civil war in their own country for years until like 1923. The Germans were raffle stomping Europe. Like they had to be taken down. And you like the point that I'm making, I'm not disputing the economic numbers that you're bringing up. Those numbers are pretty legitimate. And of course, the GDP in Russia actually went down after the Bolshevik Revolution for a long time. But that point that you're making is actually to imply, I don't know if you get it or not, you're actually making the argument to us that Germany was a power to be more afraid of than economically and militarily than the Bolsheviks.
Well, I don't think as afraid of as the Soviets, just because I think the German government was better than the Russian government. And that's not to say it was good, but that's to say if we are to have a Cold War with the German Empire versus communism, and let's say there's a 20% chance either could win, like I'd take the German Empire just because worst case scenario, if it does take over the world versus worst case scenario, communism takes over the world. I think communism is a great
20%. No, there's not a 20%. It's clear. I don't know what it is. If the Soviets have a 20% chance of winning the Cold War, the Germans have a way higher than 20% chance of winning the Cold War. You just admitted they were more economically competent than the communists. I'd be way more worried to fight Germany in a Cold War than the Soviets. The Soviets were bumbling. They were incompetent. They had no idea what they were doing economically. They were self-destructive. Germany might have actually won. That's the worry for me. In which case, oh shit, now we've got an authoritarian system running the world forever.
But the
So
thing is, because the US did side with Russia, I mean, that's part of what led to the Cold War later on with the Soviet Union. So, like, worst case scenario, if we are to have a Cold War with the German Empire versus a communist empire, and, there's a small chance either could win, then, I mean, if worst case
no, but
scenario,
there's a
one did
higher
take over
chance
the
the
world,
Germans. There's a
it's
higher
better if
chance.
it was the German Empire compared to any
No,
communist
no,
empire,
no, no, no.
because
There's a higher
communism
chance.
is more destructive.
There's a higher chance the Germans would have won the Cold War than the Soviets. The German Empire was more economically powerful per capita, more militarily competent on average than the Soviets were. There's no doubt in my mind that they would have had a higher chance of winning and destroying America than the Soviets did in the Cold War.
So I guess then my question is, with the German Empire and Russia when the Bolsheviks took power, like, on, like, just ideologically speaking, like, relative to your views, do you think is a lesser of two evil? And
I
not
don't
to
care.
say either is good, but just to say which one is a lesser of two evil.
But that's like Mao versus the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was ideologically better in the 60s. You had a much smaller chance of being starved to death in the 60s in the
Well, I
Soviet
don't
Union
know
than you did
about.
in China. But the point
Well, I don't
is,
know about
I would
that
have worked in
because
China. I would have worked with China because the Soviet Union, despite being better to their people, despite taking care of their people better than Mao, they were aiming a shit ton of nukes, and Mao was a target of their nukes. They were aiming a shit ton of nukes at us. To me, all I'm concerned about, look, I guess, we've been talking for 30 minutes. I should make my case here, or at least where I'm coming from. All I'm concerned about is America winning the world. So to me, I don't want Germany or Russia to win. I want America to win. What you're telling me is that you're going to take a country that has a higher chance of winning a Cold War against America over a country that has a lower chance of winning a Cold War against America. I just want America to dominate Europe. I don't want Germany to dominate Europe. I don't want Russia to dominate Europe. I want it to be America. So for me, when I look at this, I say, who's going to be a weaker victor that we can deal with later? And to me, it's very clear. I'd feel more confident winning a Cold War against the Bolsheviks than against Imperial Germany, because they had a lot of scientists. Like before the Nazis scared a lot of them away, a huge number of the nuclear OGs were in Germany. I personally believe they would have had nukes then in that Cold War way before America. America would have been at a big disadvantage. In the best case scenario, it doesn't go
I guess
nuclear.
one interjection then I would say, like, to that then, because you say, like, oh, we can contain the Germans and then, like, let's contain the Soviet Union, but, like, I mean, what if, like, later on down the road, you have to assume, like, there is a good chance that your country could have weak foreign policy after, so you don't always get the chance of, like, let's have two Cold Wars.
I don't even understand that argument. There could have been weak
Because
foreign
basically,
policy. Wait, I
because
don't.
basically what I'm saying then is, let's say, like, you take out the Germans then, and then Russia rises, and if it ever came to there was a Cold War, like, I mean, even in the 80s, it wasn't guaranteed you were going to get someone like Reagan. What if you had Carter for 2 years? What if you had someone else who just said, who cares? It's halfway around the world, man.
Yeah, but I also disagree with this idea that Germany's so much better than the Bolsheviks. They were both pretty vile countries. I mean, in the era that we're talking about, and we'll move on to World War II in a minute. But World War I, Germany, not a great place to live. Not a great place.
But would you
to
say
live.
it was better than Russia? Like, if you were to live in one or the other, not to say either's good, but, like, at least to me, the German Empire is much better than living in a country ruled under the thumb of Bolsheviks.
Not exactly. Not exactly. The Bolsheviks were more they were more bad to their own people at the time, for sure. But again, you've got to keep in mind, we're talking about the fate of the world. And to me, there's no doubt in my mind that Germany would have had a higher chance of beating us in the next Cold War than the Soviets did in our timeline, because the Soviets could have won theoretically too. It's just they had a much smaller chance of it. And so I'm concerned about America winning. I'm going to go and do dual containment, basically. Do whatever you can to weaken rivals, even if it means pitting them against themselves to weaken each other. And to me, I'm not worried particularly about the Bolsheviks in 1918. I'm more or 1917 or 1916. But let's say 1917 when they were becoming a formidable force within Russian politics. And then they did the revolution and all that shit later that year. What I'm worried about is Germany's already proven they're willing to invade a shit ton of countries. And they've already attacked your ship a couple years prior to that and killed your people. To me, I'm saying, look, they're the bigger threat in the moment. We kind of have to deal with them now. It's kind of like saying, which is worse, the Soviet Union or the Mujahideen? You know, the Mujahideen, they
Well, I'd
weren't
say the
really much
Soviet
of a.
Union was worse.
Well, no, but ideologically speaking, Islam
Yeah, the
is worse
Soviet
than
Union and the
communism.
threat of
But
communism was worse, man.
no, but my point is about the threat. So Germany's a bigger threat.
Well, I would
So
just say for these points, like we can like move on to it with World War II, but I guess just give like a few closing statements for this topic, just because it's
yeah,
not
we can
good
move
to.
on. We can move on. Otherwise, we'll
So I
be here
guess
all
my
night.
closing statement is just like in this case, then like if you side with one, you strengthen the other. So I don't want to strengthen the communists over the German Empire. And the other thing is that you don't always get the opportunity to fight both, just because you don't always get strong, consistent leadership that is going to take threats seriously. So if I'm to take out one threat over the other, the Russians first over the German Empire. And then part of it is just like ideological disagreement of, does someone think communism or the German Empire is worse? And probably some people who are more liberal are going to say like, oh, the German Empire is worse. And then they're like proto-fascist. Well, like people who are more right-wing are going to say, well, clearly communism is the worst threat. But because I'm a more conservative hawk, I just think communism is a much worse threat, and you got to contain it while it's small. Just like this idea where you enable them and you get to a point where you could have a Cold War, and you're not always going to have strong leadership. You're not always going to have a Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush to save the day, man.
Okay, so I'm going to make my closing case on this segment, and then we'll move on to the next segment. So it's clear here that my opponent understands and even agrees full well with my logic when it comes to the Mujahideen, when it comes to Mao's China. It's not like we're fans of their ideologies, but we recognize that they were useful in containing the communists in Russia. And however, there's a schism here where we don't agree with respect to Germany. And I believe that that logic isn't being applied here by my opponent, because as my opponent has already said near the tail end of this just now, that he more ideologically aligns with the Germans than the Russians. Whereas for me, I look at this and I say, well, they're both rivals. They both need to go down. One's invading a shit ton of countries. One's economically powerful. The other is in disarray in a civil war, and they're poor. They're not going to be as big of a threat. Let's still deal with containing Germany, because Germany could actually do some serious damage right now. And we know, as it so happened, that there did become a Cold War afterwards with the Russians, and the West wound up fortunately winning it. I am more skeptical that the West would have won a Cold War with an empowered and consolidated Germany. And had they gone on to win that Cold War, the world today would be a far worse place under the German Empire and their hegemony than it is today under the American system and American hegemony. And so that's my case. But we can move on to World War II. And with that, you've got a few minutes to make your opening statement.
Okay, so with World War II, I mean, this is kind of, but it's a bit different. Like, just because with the Nazis, they were worse than the German Empire. I mean, because the German Empire, it didn't kill 6 million Jews. And I mean, it wasn't just Jewish people that were killed. In terms of the Holocaust, there's some estimates showing like it was 10 million total just in that atrocity. So, like, it was definitely a lot of people, and it really was a brutal regime. I mean, no apologetic should be done for it then. But my position at the same time, I do have estimates showing that Stalin during his time in office is he killed, as the low estimate, 20 million people, and there's some that go as high as 60 million people. So for me, it's similar where Nazi Germany is expanding, the Soviet Union, like they're also going to expand as well, because you have to assume like adversaries are going to expand. And for me, I just feel the Axis, like, so far as to take out the Soviets. If they're not going to do anything about the Soviets, you shouldn't side with the Axis. But just insofar as they're going to limit the Soviets, you should side with them. And I wouldn't have spent, and again, I wouldn't have spent as much on involvement then. I don't think the U.S. should have, especially for World War II, it really ran up the debt then. So I wouldn't have spent as much. I still would have spent a lot. I mean, 10% of the economy is quite a bit then. And then also, I mean, the U.S., and it's not like it just has to stay at home and do nothing. Like, I mean, it can try to orient Latin American or like British colonies like more in a pro-US, pro-Britain direction. So I'm not even just saying like, oh, do nothing then. But I think, but in general, my 3 points are just less involvement overall. Side with the Axis insofar as to counter the USSR. There's really no other reason. And if there's some money left over, you can just use it for nation building and like countries to orient them towards the US and Britain.
Okay, so obviously there's a heat wave here in British Columbia right now, and I'm obviously not using my camera because it's too hot to like wear a suit or anything like that right now. I usually try to dress pretty professional for debates, but I'll tell you, if you could see my face right now, I'm cringing hard, bro. I'm actually freaking cringing hard, bro. I gotta say, I knew going into this that your position, as you had stated it, was that you believe that the U.S. and Britain shouldn't have allied with the USSR and sided with the Axis powers, and as you say, given them little aid in order to counter the threat of global communism. And you do note that, for clarification, you're outspoken against genocide denial involving the Holocaust and the Holodomor. So here's the problem with this. To me, just as in the case of World War I, when World War II was at the outset, and the Germans had invaded Poland, and of course, in 41, they went on to invade the Soviet Union. And of course, America got involved in 41. There's no doubt in my mind that Nazi Germany was a bigger threat, a bigger economic threat, a bigger industrial threat, a bigger scientific threat, and of course, a bigger global threat than the Bolsheviks were in 1941. Again, we're in a fairly similar position. Now, Russia was a little bit richer now, and Stalin had improved a lot of their industrial capacity with the 5-year plans and American assistance in the 30s. But when you look at the overall aggregate, Germany was still a far bigger menace than the Soviets were. And so to me, when I look at this and I say, we're going to side with the more powerful actor and expedite their taking over of Eurasia, to me, there's no doubt in my mind that the aid definitely should have gone to Stalin, because Stalin was a way of undermining Germany's consolidation of territory and power in Europe and the world at large. And of course, this does raise a second point, though, which is that America's involvement in World War II was specifically a result of Germany declaring war on America. And of course, Japan, their ally, attacking America and killing about 2,500 Americans at Pearl Harbor in an attempt to do a large attack on the United States aircraft carriers and the rest of their fleet. And to me, I can't think of anything more cucked than wanting to be allies with the guy that's declaring war on you. I don't see how you could even how you could feasibly, I should say, be allies with the countries that are doing war against you. How do you?
Well, what you say with the Soviet Union is because we sided with them and we didn't try to take them down early. There was the Cold War, and they did have 40,000 nukes pointed at America. And there was one time where they were actually about to use them, but Stanislav Petrov called it off. Then just one person called off the nuking of millions of American citizens. So this idea is if all the Soviet Union wouldn't have declared war on America, there's a chance they would have then if they gained enough ground. So to me, either way, both sides would have declared war on America at some point, or at least hated America then.
But you're aware that Germany, the only reason that the Soviets got the ICBM capacity and the secrets in the first place was a matter of espionage. It was a matter of German scientists, especially in the early days, that they were able to use for their missile program. And so basically they got nukes off of spies in America and Britain. and they got the missiles to deliver them off of German scientists. Whereas in this world, the world where we help Germany, there's no more Soviet Union. Now it's just this huge Nazi empire from Portugal all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and they've got all the scientists now. Those scientists never go to the Russians. There's no doubt in my mind they would have got nukes before 1949 when the Soviets did. And there's no doubt in my mind that by the 1980s, they would have probably had more nukes than the Soviets did because they were economically stronger per capita. So I don't understand this idea. Now, you could make the case, and you made the case in the World War I segment where you said that the German Empire was ideologically less repulsive than the Bolsheviks, and there's an argument to be had there. I don't believe that there's an argument to be had there with the Nazis versus the Soviets. I don't.
Well, would you say the Nazis, they overall killed less people because low estimates for Stalin? Then I mean,
well, they did it in 12 years.
Here. It's 20 million people, and the high estimates are 60 million people.
So that's 19. That's
estimates
1928.
Are around 12 million people.
That's 19,
meaning
that's
that more people got killed under Stalin.
That's 1928 to 1953 when he was in power. He killed a lot of people, yes. Now, a huge number of that death toll was attributable to the war effort against Germany and how they basically did human wave tactics. The Germans, in contrast, had 12 years, and they killed a big proportion of what Stalin did in about 30 years. And so,
but do you think they would have continued with the same spree then? Like they would have
done nuked America. Yeah, they would have nuked America in the next Cold War. They would have had the scientists, the delivery. I mean, keep in mind, the reason.
So for you, in terms of the Nazis and the communists, like you don't think one, like despite them both being awful, you don't think one is a lesser evil? Because to me, it's just Stalin is much more evil, at least to me, than Hitler.
No.
Even though
they're morally equivalent.
But it's just, I think there is the lesser of two evil.
Dude, they're morally equivalent. The problem is that Germany's a bigger threat. So if you got two evil dudes and one's rich,
the thing is, you think both are morally equivalent. So thus you side with the little guy to take out the big guy. It's similar to, what I agreed upon with China and the Soviet Union. I view them as two sides of the same coin. So I think part of the reasoning of what you're saying have helped the little guy to take out the big guy. Personally, for you, you just feel them as both the same. Then, well, for me, like I think there are distinctions to be made. I think there is like an ideological difference where, just for me, the communists are a much greater threat. And if millions of people like are to be under communism versus Nazism, despite there's either way, there's going to be massive suffering in the world, but it really is just a matter of damage control. And to me, communism is worse to live on.
It's worse unless you happen to be gay, or you happen to be a woman, or you happen to be Jewish.
Well, overall, on average, if you're just an average person.
So if you're hashtag white boy summer, and you're a white boy and you're straight and you're not in any way deviant from whatever the fascist cultural mores are, and you're a Christian and all that shit, yeah, maybe you survive better in Germany.
Well, I said on average, just if you're an average person.
But if you're an average person, you're not going to be white German Aryan with blue eyes and blonde hair. And I don't know, because they killed everybody that wasn't like that. But look. Here's the problem. So you're one of these stupid conservatives that has more of a cultural affinity for the fascists than the communists. For me,
well, I could easily flip that on you and say, "Oh, you're a communist sympathizer siding with Russia." We could just go back and forth.
I said they're both morally repulsive. They're both morally equal.
They're both morally equal. Like this could just go back and forth, man.
I'm not arguing that the Soviet Union is morally better than fascism, though. I'm arguing that they're morally. I'm arguing that they're morally.
Do you support military
I'm arguing that they're both morally. I'm arguing that they're both.
Do you support military aid given to the Soviet Union at the time? Do you support aid or not?
It should have been higher. It should have been higher. Honestly, we could have ended the war sooner. There should have been even more land.
So you're willing to give aid to a guy who killed, at low estimates, 20 million people.
And you're willing to be allies with a guy who killed 6 million Jews. Bazinga.
It's not as much as 20 million, man.
Are you? No, you're fucking kidding me, dude. You're fucking kidding me. So you're one of these like incel, PragerU bros who
Here go the
basically,
memes. Here go the memes now.
well, yeah, you literally are saying that we should have worked with the guy who did the Holocaust. It's
I mean,
very
you're saying
clear,
the guy who
dude.
killed 20 million people at the low estimates. So I mean, this
Over
could just go
30
back and
years,
forth.
over 30 years, Hitler killed
But
11. Look.
but
Here's the
how
thing
many
about the
people got
Holocaust,
killed
bro.
under
Here's the thing
communism
about
as
the
a whole?
Holocaust, bro.
How many
Here's
people
the
got
thing
killed
about the
under
Holocaust,
communism as a
bro.
whole?
Here's the thing about the Holocaust, bro. It wasn't just 6 million. It was 6 million Jews. There were 5 million Roma, gay, etc. It was
Well, I
11
said the
million
estimates
people.
for the
It was
Holocaust were around
11
10 to 12
million
million.
people. It was 11 million people murdered
Well, I
by the
said 10 to
fascist
12 million.
empire. It was 11 million people murdered by the fascist empire, not in even the 12 years of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That was only in the latter tail of that. About 4 to 5 years, they killed 11 million people. Now you
Well, one
expand
thing
that
is,
out,
would
and
you
you
agree with
expand
the
that out, and you
domino
give
theory?
them the full reign that Stalin had, 30 years to pull off this shit. There's no doubt in my mind they would have killed more people. They had the economic and industrial capacity to kill more people. And we're also ignoring their ally, Japan. Japan slaughtered 20 million people in Asia, and yet you think we should have been allies with them after they bombed the shit out of America at Pearl Harbor. Why? Why would you be allies with a guy who attacks your naval base? That's the most cuck shit that I've heard. Why?
Well, the thing is I mean, with the Soviet Union and the threat of communism as a whole, I mean, there is the domino theory that, like, it's not just like the number that got killed under the Soviet Union, but even under communist regimes as a whole. And if you took out the Soviet Union early, not only would the Soviet Union have been able to be taken out, but other communist regimes as well, meaning upwards of, I mean, it could be as much as 100 million people that would have been saved, or I mean, even if they were oppressed like under a fascist regime, as a whole, it wouldn't have been as bad as living under a communist regime.
If
And
you weren't
even though
one
they
of the
both are
people that was
bad, like, I mean,
exterminated, if you weren't one of
both
the
are
people
good,
that was
but just
exterminated. No, dude, here's the problem. Right? So I advocate that the US should have nuked the Soviets before they ever got nukes in 1949. Operation Unthinkable should have happened. You should have taken out the Soviets right away in the early Cold War. That's my view.
but you do have to factor in an element of pragmatism of, if you take out one side, I mean, you can hope that America has strong political will to take out the other side, but there's always a chance that it doesn't. I mean, what if
Yeah, in which case we end up with
Ronald
Hitler
Reagan?
taking
What if the
over the world,
Republican
if you're
Party?
right. In
What
which
if the
case we end
Republican
up with
Party of
Hitler.
1980 was the Republican Party of 2020 and said, "Who cares about foreign conflicts?"
Yeah, in which case we end up with Hitler taking over the world. So that's what you're saying. We better
Well, I
off
mean,
to have
well, I mean,
Hitler
under
and
your
his
strategy, the
grandkids.
Soviet Union would have taken
Better
over
off
the
to have
world.
Hitler and
So
his
you would have allowed
grandkids
the Soviet
running the
Union to
world.
take over the world.
Better off to have Hitler and his grandkids running the world today, and Hirohito and his grandkids running the world today as a fascist conglomerate of empires, than to have Gorbachev, I guess, by this point. Like,
Yeah.
come on. Look, Stalin was horrible, but even
Well, what about
Stalin
Mao?
killed fewer
Wouldn't you say
people
Mao
per
killed a
year.
lot of people?
Stalin
Wouldn't you
killed
say
fewer
Pol
people
Pot killed a
per
lot
year.
of people?
So Stalin killed fewer people per year than Hitler. Hitler killed a lot of people in a very short amount of time. Stalin killed a lot of people in a very long amount of time. The absolute value is higher on Stalin's end. But again, you're factoring in World War II into that, a war that the boys that you wanted to side with started in the first place. You would have supported them in invading the Soviet Union. I want to make something clear to you and to the audience. If we had done what you suggested and we just ignore them attacking Pearl Harbor and we work with Germany against the Soviet Union.
I mean, well, if I were in charge,
dude, you got to let me finish, dude. You've got to let me finish, or I'm going to have to mute you. You got to let me finish, or I'm going to have to mute you. So here's the thing. The Soviet Union being out of the picture, so Japan and Germany having Eurasia basically at this point. What are they going to do in the next Cold War now? You're in a Cold War with them. This isn't even like maybe we can kind of get along with Imperial Germany and not have a Cold War with them, which I don't believe in. This is, we're literally dealing with two countries that want to destroy us. They're ideologically opposed to us, and they have all the scientists, and they're going to get nukes, and they're going to have the rockets to deliver them, and we're not, because we don't have any German scientists to help our program. Oh, shit. We're fucked. We should have been siding with the Soviets against these guys. We made a mistake. There's no doubt in my mind that the Nazis would have won the Cold War with America before the 1980s. They would have buried America. They had the industry. They had the scientists. They had the ingenuity. Now, America would have had nukes. Yes, America would have had nukes and they would have had nukes, but the Germans would have had the delivery systems way before America. Now, if America could pull off some good espionage like the Soviets did, may they get some of the tech from the Germans, except the CIA was nowhere near as effective as the KGB. The CIA is a meme. They tried to kill Castro 600 times and they failed. So I don't trust that America would have been as effective at getting German secrets as the KGB was at getting American secrets. So therefore, the Germans are going to win. Now, if you said to me, would we rather have a world where the Germans and Japan win or where the Soviet Union wins? Well, the Soviet Union in the 1980s was a far better place to live than fascist Germany ever would have been. Fascist Germany never would have had the kind of Gorbachev type reforms or anything. They would have just exterminated all the Ukrainians, all the Slavs, everybody that didn't meet their particular racial categories. And so the only way that you could ever make a pragmatic argument that they'd be better to live under is if you are a straight white Aryan looking dude, bro, who's gonna do white boy summer in Hamburg, you know, with the SS boys. That's the only way. That's the only way. And even then, I say fuck it. You know, smash the fash. That's my attitude. So.
Okay, so I think for this we can like have closing statements and then move on to divorce. But like I'll just say for this is that because we sided with the Soviets, we had the Cold War, and it wasn't guaranteed that you were going to get strong leadership. There's no guarantee you get leaders like, I mean, Reagan or Bush. I mean, what if for the Republican Party there was someone like the time that just said like, who cares about the world? And then that leads to the point of like lesser of two evil of if one is to dominate the world. I mean, in the case of Kevin, is he said communism is better, but at least for me, I think communism as a whole, and it wasn't just the Soviets, it was other countries, because there's the domino theory where like the communist ideology expands. Like communism killed upwards of 100 million people worldwide. And I mean, again, ideological difference, but I mean, both ideologies are repulsive, and because the U.S. can't just like borrow its entire economy, and there does need to be some damage control, then where, I mean, both sides are not good, but like we have to pick one. At least to me, I view communism as a greater threat. Thus, I think the U.S. should have supported the Axis insofar as to limit the influence of the USSR. If they're not going to do that, then don't support them. I mean, they are a repulsive ideology and worldview.
I gotta ask a question. Just don't take this the wrong way, but like, are you trolling? I almost get this attitude just from your cadence and everything that this is a troll.
I mean, well, how so? I mean, the debate's been around an hour. Like, do I just go on a stream for an hour then, like for the sake of it?
It's happened before with the anarchists, yeah.
Then I mean, well, I'm not. I think anarchists are cringe then, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just have like opinions that you disagree with. Then is the argument is like, oh, that's a troll.
No, I'm not saying you're a troll. I'm just asking if you are a troll because it just seems like a trolly thing to say. I mean, so anyway, my closing statements. Here's the deal. Oh, well, you know, Germany wins. We worked with the Germans, and now there's a Cold War with them. What if we don't have the political will, the political leaders like Reagan and Bush? What happens if, you know, we have political weakness here and the Germans win? Additionally, even if we do have Reagan and Bush type people, even if we do have Kennedy type people in this Cold War with the Germans, there's no doubt in my mind it would have been a shorter Cold War. The Nazis, they would have had the upper hand from the get-go. The Nazis would have had the ballistic missile delivery capability. All that America would have had was some nuclear weapons for sure, but not an effective means to deliver them. Germany would have had an empire spanning from Portugal to the Pacific, from India to Norway. It would have been an absolute disaster. It would have been essentially America, the continent, pitted up against Eurasia, the continent. They would have had the population. They would have had the industry. They would have had the scientists. They would have had the nuclear capacity and the delivery mechanisms. We would have been at a disadvantage at all levels. And there's no doubt in my mind that there was a higher percent chance that they would have won that at that point because we fucked over our one useful partner in Eastern Eurasia, the Soviet Union, that could have done something about the Germans. Now, look at what happened. Now we have to live in a world where instead of the communists killing 100 million people throughout other regimes over a century, the Nazis are killing, hundreds of millions of people throughout Africa, throughout Asia. They've already exterminated all the Jews, all the Ukrainians, all the Slavs, etc. They're already done away with. Consider by this point in the 60s, where Nazi Germany has consolidated Eurasia, they've probably already killed upwards of 1 billion people that don't fit their racial guidelines, and the rest are slaves. So the Slavs are gone; they don't exist anymore. They would have made the communists look like children's play in terms of how many people they would have slaughtered. And so, to me, it's very clear that working with the Soviets against Germany was the right thing to do. It was the smart thing to do. And if we had supported them more, perhaps the war could have ended sooner. And I'll never understand the idea of us enriching the bigger threat from the get-go. The only way that makes sense is if you have political and cultural sympathies with that bigger threat to a point where you say, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if Hitler took over the world and his allies took over the world. And I cannot abide by that. Hashtag smash the fash. So now we move into the divorce segment. So you got a few minutes to make your case.
Okay, so for this segment, this is concerning divorce and like what the state's role should be in it and whether or not there should be punishments for those who get divorced or various sanctions. Because my position is on divorce is that if people are to get divorced, there should be a $10,000 American fine or a $12,000 Canadian fine that people have to pay. Divorce, then people should not just be able to get divorced freely without having to pay the state something. And my view for this is that with divorce, unless someone's liberal or they don't like the family, they're going to say, divorce is totally cool and all that. But the thing is with divorce, it does have negative effects for society, and it especially affects children's growth. And I just think instead of this attitude of they may, or just let people do what they want, even if it hurts them in the long run, that the state should get involved. And even if people don't like paying the fines, or even if people stay in marriages they're not perfectly happy with, it's better than just this libertine worldview of just let everyone do what they want because liberty, bro.
Okay, so I patently disagree. I disagree with all of that, but I would say, let's try to get to some, not even necessarily common ground. I just want to hash this out. So I'm not going to say that I would agree with your position, but I'm going to say if I were to entertain the possibility of me saying, okay, we do the fines, would you at least then say that people should be free to have sex with whomever they choose before marriage so that they can have a bunch of partners to figure out who is a good partner for them, so that when they do get married, they have a higher chance of sticking together, as opposed to this, Christian culture of oh no, wait until you get married to have sex, because that's a recipe for divorce. But I guess that's not an issue to you because you just want to find divorce, so ignore the problem. Is that it?
I can answer that actually. So my view, at least on premarital sex, is at the end of the day, most people in society, they are going to engage in sexual acts, whether or not people like it then. So, and I think especially for people, you really can't do much about them. So I think up until a certain point, 20 to 25, it should be discouraged, but it should still be legal. But beyond 25 or so, premarital sex, I think should be illegal then, just because beyond 25, that's when people's brain is fully developed and they can make consensual decisions. So as far as it being illegal, it's not going to apply to a 15.
Wait, you cut out at the last second there. It's not going to apply to what?
I was just saying, as far as it being illegal, it's not going to apply for people below 20 to 25, just because when people are adults, they can consent to things better than a kid can that, just follows whatever their desires are.
That's crazy. So you want to make premarital sex illegal? So I got a question.
Well, beyond 20 to 25,
I got a question to you. Why don't you go and live? No, I got a question for you. Why don't you go and live in Iran or something where they do have that kind of cultural norm?
I mean, well, economically, they're a lot more poor than the U.S. then. I mean,
Why,
even
why do you
I'm in
think the
favor of
U.S.
the
is
U.S.
rich?
declaring war on Iran. I want the U.S. to
Yeah.
take out the regime.
Why do you think the U.S. is rich? Where do you think the economic ingenuity comes from? It comes from a liberal culture of innovation, not this
And I wouldn't say
backward.
so. I mean, the U.S. I mean, used to be pretty culturally conservative relative to now. It's only recently that, in terms of social issues, it's gone further and further to the left. Then, I mean,
Yeah, and the economic growth has
even in the
gone up.
'90s, like a majority of Democrats didn't approve of gay marriage, but now even a majority of Republicans approve of it. It's only recently a recent phenom. It's only a recent phenomenon that you've had this shift towards a liberal culture.
And economic growth has gone up at an unprecedented rate. Yeah, America was more conservative for the longest time, and the economy growed, on the whole, at a relatively linear rate. And then you look at a lot of the reforms and everything that have happened. Look at all the CEOs and everything today. All these liberal-minded geniuses out there. They tend not to be backward people that are worried that there's some sky god who's going to burn them forever if they have sex with more than one woman. So
I mean,
that's
but in terms of like average incomes for people, I mean, can you really say that like the average person today is better off than 20 or 40 years ago just because, I mean, even though CEOs have gotten richer, I mean, in terms of median income relative to inflation, has it really gotten higher? And in addition,
Wait, I just did a video on this just a few days ago where I argued that romanticization in the 1950s was bunk and junk. That's the title of the video. I talked about the economic argument, and I said that when you look at the bottom quintile, when you look at the bottom 20% of the population, you can say relative to productivity and relative to inflation, they were slightly economically better off in the 50s and 60s. But you know what I said? You know what I said there? I said that freedom and the ability to be gay and open about it, the ability to be bisexual and open about it, the ability to have a relationship where the male doesn't always have to be the breadwinner, that those freedoms that come from a free society are worth money. And it basically amounts to asking the question, would you rather live in communist China today, which is super conservative and culturally traditional and shit, but make $100,000 a year? Or would you rather live in America and make $20,000 a year? And I'd always say, well, I'd rather live in America and make 20,000 than live in a dictatorship and make 100,000. To me, the class reductionist economics only matter thing. I mean, you talk about the debt a lot. Look, I talk about debt a fair bit. I believe that money lending should, at the end of the day, be illegal down the road. But for me, I find that there are more important things than just how much money you make, and that as you grow older, I think a part of maturity is understanding that yeah, money isn't everything. Happiness is something that matters too. And the system that you're talking about is basically put up with this backwards dark culture that will shame you for your human nature, but it's okay because you'll make 5% more on your bottom 20% of income earners salary. Because let's keep in mind, like the middle class is better off, the upper middle class is better off, the CEOs are better off, everybody's better off. And then the working class people, look, I'm working class. I'm like bottom 20% of income earners. I'd rather live right now than in Canada in the 1950s because I live in an open society today. So that's worth money to me. That's worth a lot of money to me. And in fact, if you offered me $100,000 to go and work in Iran or China or Russia or Hungary, I would outright say no. I don't even travel to rule of law countries, never mind work there. So outside rule of law countries.
okay, so I guess my question is you talk about liberty, and probably to you, liberty means like just people, partying, drinking, getting divorced.
Yeah, the
Then,
American way, the American dream, dude.
so
Except for
like
the
you think
divorce
the
thing. No, no,
American,
no, except for the divorce thing. I don't think you understand it. The reason why divorce rates are so high in America is because you have this Christian shame culture where people have to wait until they get married to have sex. So of course they're just going to marry whoever to have sex, and then they get divorced because it doesn't work out.
I
Why
mean,
not
well,
have?
not really then, because most people do have premarital sex.
But you want to
Like,
shame people over it. You want to discourage it. And in many states, that's a part of the culture. Why is it that the states with the higher divorce rates tend and the higher teen pregnancy rates, mind you, tend to be states like Mississippi, which has a higher teen pregnancy rate than sub-Saharan Africa, for example? That's because of Christian conservatism. So good job, guys.
yeah, but I mean, would you say some states are like they discourage it? And again, I do think the U.S. is better than Afghanistan and Pakistan then, but I mean, would you say there that divorce rates in Afghanistan and Pakistan are
You
lower
cut
or
out.
higher than the
Wait,
US?
oh, you said divorce rates. Divorce rates. Yeah, divorce rates are higher in the US than Pakistan because in Pakistan, yeah, they stone adulterers and shit. They have a deeply conservative and backward culture where women aren't even seen as equals with men because of Islam, for example. So, oh, but the divorce rates are higher in America. I got news. That's actually a good thing. That's kind of like saying that the job turnover rate is higher in America than in, say, communist China or the Soviet Union. It's like, is it bad? No, it means people are free to leave their job whenever they want. You can't do that in North Korea or the Soviet Union because the government gives you a job and you have to work that job. Whereas in America, you can just say, I want to move to a different firm now. And you'd say, well, turnover rates are higher. Likewise with divorce. Divorce rates are higher. People in a market, in a free market, are finding what suits their preferences better. Why is this a bad thing? Now, I'll say you might bring up the kids thing. I am of the view that childbearing, that having kids, making that commitment to have kids, definitely needs to be not outright like banned or prohibited by the government or anything. But I would abolish child tax credits, for example, because I would say if you're somebody who that would make an economic difference to you, you're too poor to have kids. So I want the only people having kids to be people that have affirmed, they've decided, they've fallen into place, they know who they want to spend their life with, that kind of thing, and they're making 100,000, 150,000 a year. They can afford to take care of the kids and give them a good upbringing. And I don't care if they're gay, if they're straight, whatever, as long as they can do that. But the problem with the Christian conservative culture, and maybe you wouldn't fall in this or not, we can see what you think, is that they advocate to have more kids. They advocate for more child tax credits, while at the same time advocating against divorce liberalization, advocating against sexual liberalization. In other words, what you want is culturally imposed fascism within the family, as opposed to, say, outright what Germany would do, where they just say straight up ban it or whatever under Hitler. To me, it's the cultural work that would be done there would be tantamount to state tyranny. It would be a very dark place to live. I wouldn't want to go back to that. It would be like America in the 50s, basically, except even worse because we've gone backwards. At least in the 50s, there was constant progress towards where we are now.
Okay, so for that, is at least with divorce, would you at least agree that on average, it's really not a good thing for anyone, and especially
No.
children being raised?
No. It can usually be a good thing because people felt trapped in a relationship. A lot of times, it is because of that Christian culture where they have to wait to have sex, so they marry somebody young and it doesn't work out. They weren't really meant for each other. That's a good thing. They're perfecting their lives, and the fact that they had kids in a marriage that wasn't working, to me, they shouldn't have had kids. The problem isn't that they got divorced. The problem is that they had kids before they were with somebody they were ready to be with. That's my point. So,
Okay,
what do you make of that?
with the kids argument, I would actually disagree with because I'm not Christian. I don't think the goal of society is just to have as many kids as possible. I think ideally if people had around 2 kids per family, because then you wouldn't have this increasing population, but it wouldn't decrease either. Like something like that where people just had around 2 kids then. So I'm not in favor of multiply and fill the earth then. But as far as divorce, I do think that it is a negative thing for people then, and especially her development. Like among people who get divorced, they can get issues later on, like depression or anxiety or contemplating their decision. And as far as this
people
idea
in
of
bad
it
marriages,
liberates them,
people in bad
my point
marriages
would
kill
be,
themselves. People in bad marriages kill themselves. What about women that are trapped in marriages that don't work out anymore? What about the depression there because of conservative culture? You say you're not Christian. I got to ask you, what religion are you? Because what you're doing sounds like something I could only understand if somebody who believed they were going to burn forever, that living under the threat of cosmic North Korea would say. How can you be atheist or agnostic and make these arguments? Or
well, for
argue
me,
with
as far as religion, I mean, I would say I do believe in God, and I'm a bit secular in the sense I don't go to church too much, or I don't read the text. But I mean, probably if I were to identify with a religion, I would say I lean the most to Buddhism, and among branches of Christianity, Calvinism the most appealing then. And the thing is, as far as like, I mean, the figure of Jesus, I don't think he was the son of God, but I do think he was a holy figure. And if people learn from him, like, it's not going to be a bad thing. Man.
Oh yeah, so that whole thing about how if you so much as have any sort of sexual desire for a woman who isn't your wife, for example, that you're going to burn in hell forever. That shame culture, that's not a bad thing, right? You know, where he upholds all
But do you
the
think adultery
burning
is
of
a
the.
good thing then? Like, do you think someone
No. But if
like
you're
having
not
sex with
married to a
multiple
woman, if you're
women
not
or
married to
multiple
a
men
woman,
is a good thing?
no. You don't understand the scripture. You admitted you haven't read the scripture. He's not talking about you're married to somebody and you have sex. He's talking about that too with somebody that's not your wife. He's talking about if you're not married yet and you lust after a woman, that you're going to burn in hell forever unless you repent of it. So this is a
I mean, well,
problem
I haven't
this
read
is
that
a
specifically.
problem with this goddamn look. Christianity is a joke. But when you say you think that Jesus is holy, but that you lean more towards Buddhism, understand something. Uh, Christian scripture teaches that he's the only way, that Jesus is the only way. Buddhism is idol worship in Christianity. And so you would go to hell anyway for that. You would go to hell just the same as I would go to hell. So you're not doing yourself any favors there. If you're admitting that he's kind of holy, but also Buddhism, no, you're going to burn in hell. So unless you repent for idolatry, I agree with you on Calvinism. I've said before, if I was going to be Christian, I'd be a Calvinist because it's one of the only branches of Christianity that understands that God is an evil motherfucker who makes people just to be burned forever. So for sure, Calvinism is one of the only consistent teachings within Christian theology that actually makes sense if you believe Scripture to be true. My advice to you would be read Scripture before you defend Scripture. Also, read Scripture before you criticize Scripture too, to the more atheist people out there. So anyway, no, I don't get it. I really don't get it. How somebody who's not, I mean, you say you're Buddhist, and sure, like Thailand's a pretty
Well,
conservative
I mean, I'm
country,
not
but
like devout or hardcore.
okay.
And I said I'm a bit secular in the sense I'm not hardcore. I don't like go to church every week or like read the scripture that much. But like, I mean, if I were to identify with the religion, it would be that, man.
So
So, like, I'm not this hardcore religious fundamentalist who says like, oh, you have to believe the text 100%, otherwise, like bad things are gonna come upon you.
So what do you make then of Islamic Sharia law? Because
Well,
it
in the
sounds
case
like you
of
would feel happier living in a Sharia country than in a
Well, in the
liberal
case of
country.
Islam, I actually do oppose it. And I mean, even I support the US declaring war with Iran, and I do support the US sanctioning countries which refuse to recognize Israel, because I think in the case of Islam, like, it's pretty clear with its expansionist goal. And especially with them like entertaining this idea of like, let's just kill millions of Jews. To me, it really is something that the West needs to take seriously and take out before it spreads. So
Wait,
in the
take
case
out
of
before it
Islam,
spreads. Take out before it spreads. Then you're saying what we should have done was work more with the Soviet Union to take out the Nazis before they could spread more, right? Because they were the ones working with the Islamic clerics in Palestine and elsewhere to kill as many Jews as possible.
well, in the
So,
case of World War I and World War II,
for World War II.
there were the Ottoman Empire that sided with the Germans, and in World War II, there was Palestine that sided with the Germans. And I mean, I said earlier we kind of wrapped up the topic like for those ones, but I said I don't find either to be good, and for that
But you
reason,
want to work
because
with
even for
them.
me
But
personally, I would consider
wait. So you
myself
want
a
to take out.
Zionist, where I support the existence of the Jewish state and the Jewish state's ability to defend itself. But I just feel them overall as a lesser of two evil, even though I am fully willing to grant that point that that is like evil and morally repugnant that they sided with the Ottoman Turks and later Palestine.
So how do you want to take out an ideology that wants to kill a ton of Jews before it can get out of hand when you admitted you would help the Nazis against the Soviets so that they can have all of Eurasia so that when we do the Cold War with them, now they're even stronger than the Soviets would have been.
Well, I said overall lesser of two evil then, but the point is, as far
But
as
why
now, I
not?
mean, post World War.
Why
But
can't you?
moving on to post World War II, I mean, I would say with the Islamic world and like their genocidal vision of taking out the Jews, and even if they're not outright genocidal, they do persecute Jews in these countries. I do think they are regimes that should be condemned and should be sanctioned for refusing to recognize Israel. And one by one, like, I mean, I think starting with Iran, the U.S. should and Western countries should declare war and have
Okay,
regime change followed by nation building.
so we agree on Iran. I also support a war with Iran. But the problem that I have is I don't get why you're doing the lesser of two evils thing. Like when me and my community, when we do lesser of two evils, like, you know, we talk about the Soviets in Germany, we talk about, you know, Vietnam, we talk about Korea, we talk about Pinochet, we talk about all that stuff. We're talking, or Saudi Arabia versus Iran. We're talking about who's a natural ally, who's a security threat, who's less of a security threat. We already all agreed that they're all evil dudes. The question is, who's the bigger threat, and how can we work with a smaller threat to counter the bigger threat? You know. But for you, when you say that the Nazi Germany was a lesser evil than the Soviet Union, you're not actually talking in military or industrial power. You would admit to me that they were actually stronger and more economically competent than the Soviets. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would admit that, but I mean, anyways, with
Um,
the like divorce and religion argument, like I actually would
Well, no,
agree
no,
that I'm
I
not a
got to
fan
get
of
back to this.
Islam.
I got to get back to this though, because I just want to understand something. So when you say lesser evil, you don't mean the lesser threat or a natural ally. You mean lesser evil as in the Nazis ideologically were better than the communists. Is that correct?
Yeah, ideologically speaking, even though I said I do find it morally repugnant because I mean I am a Zionist in the modern day is I do think that like the West does need to take the threat of anti-Semitic regime seriously, and thus I support war with Iran.
So what would you say though to somebody that would argue that Iran actually does a better job at enforcing the social mores and cultural norms that you want in America than say the United States? What would you say? Because it always seems interesting to me when you do have conservatives that will oppose these regimes, and I'm like, okay, but they basically want what Iran has in America. Why not be natural allies with them? They
The key thing is that in the case of Iran, like they want genocide against Jews. Well, if it was another religion where they had similar rules, they wouldn't be calling for genocide against Jews. And some say, "Oh, that's hysterical." But I mean, even now they are building up their nuclear arsenal beyond defensive purposes, and it's pretty clear with all the money they're spending on the military, they're not just spending it for fun and giggles. Then they are spending it to either one day nuke Israel or they're going to pass it on to one of their proxies to nuke Israel. And you're going to get a lot of anti-war voices that say, "Oh, how do we know it was Iran that did it?" But like, it was definitely Iran that had some role in it.
Yeah, and
Down the
I've made
line.
that point before. They're going to give a nuke to one of their proxies to try to say, "Oh, we didn't do anything wrong. It was the Houthis that used the nuke." It's like, well, where did they get it from? I agree with that. I guess I got a question for you. Are you Jewish? Because I'm not Jewish, but I'm a Zionist. So that kind
I
of
mean, I'm not Jewish. I said I lean towards Buddhism then because among, I would say, three religions I lean the most towards, like in order: Buddhism, Calvinism, and Judaism. While religions I don't like the most, I would say Islam, Catholicism, and Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay, interesting. What's it about Jehovah's Witnesses? Because they're actually pretty debt pilled. They don't like debt very much. They don't tell their people to go into debt. That's
Well,
one of
the
the few
thing
things that
is,
Islam does right, actually, is they have a pretty good stance on debt too. But
Well, the thing is with Jehovah's Witnesses, I just feel them as like a bit too gated. Where like basically, if someone in their family is not a Jehovah's Witness, they just excommunicate them or don't talk to them. Then, which I think is pretty mean. Then that like even if you have family members that don't agree with you, you shouldn't just excommunicate them.
okay, so okay, there we go. So, what is it about Israel that appeals to you, though? Because Israel is a pretty liberal society in many ways,
I mean,
whereas
well, in
Iran
terms
is
of
more,
Israel, there are liberal and conservative elements, and I would support
yeah.
the conservative parties in Israel. But I mean, as far as the point on Israel, I mean, the main difference between Israel and Iran is a lot economically better off, and the U.S. is a lot better economically off. So for me, I'm not a fan of social liberalism, but I would take a liberalized society if the economy was much better. Then because in the
Okay.
case of Iran, I mean, they don't really have like competent scientists and their economy is just not growing as much. And at the end of the day, that's really people's primary needs, whether they get fed. So if I have to deal with a society that's more liberalized, but it's easier for me to put food on the table. I'd much rather take the society where it's much easier to put food on the table.
So I got a question for you. Would you rather live in a dictatorship where you're making more money or a democracy where you're making less money?
I mean, well, it depends on what it was. I mean, there would have to be context.
Well, no, I'm straight up saying like we can go into more detail, but the alternative is straight up a democracy. So the democracy could have a liberal government, could have a conservative government, but it's a government that is representative of a popular election. The dictatorship in this case is straight up like authoritarian. In other words, you can be disappeared in the night. Your family can go to the camps, that kind of thing. But you're going to be making more money in the dictatorship. The dictatorship does a better job. The democracy is having an economic crash right now. Which would you rather live in?
Well, I would just say, I mean, it would depend on the context. There would have to be more info given of exactly how many people would be killed under the dictatorship, how much better off they are economically. Just saying, oh, democracy versus dictatorship, and I mean, comparing those two themselves, I couldn't give a straight answer of one's better economically. It really would just depend on the context.
Okay, so let's say this. Let's say this. Would you rather live in Germany, like Nazi Germany, in the 1960s after they've won, their invasion with the UK and the Soviets and all that stuff, and they've got a GDP per capita right now of the people that happen to live there still of, let's say, $30,000 at the time. Like, let's just say $70,000 a year right now. That's your average money that you're going to be making there. But you have to live under the National Socialist German Workers' Party versus America. America is not as well off. America is a democracy. America's actually had a bit of an economic downturn in terms of not having very many trading partners left in the world now after Japan and Germany have won the war. America, you're actually only going to be making about the equivalent of $25,000 in today's money. But in America, you can vote for your president and you have a democracy with a rule of law. Where would you rather live? You're in Germany in the 1960s or America in the 1960s, except you're making 2.5 times as much money in Germany. Where would you rather live?
No, your difference is like 2.5 times the amount, because if it's like a minor difference, I mean, obviously
That is a minor difference. No, that's a minor difference. We're talking about your freedom or 2.5 times as much money, because you can still live on 25,000 a year.
But if the incomes are comparable, I mean, obviously.
No, they're not comparable. Like they're somewhat comparable. It's not like you're making 100 times as much money in Germany. You're just making 70,000 versus 25,000 in today's money in America in the 60s or in Germany in the 60s. To me, it's not a hard question, because
for me, I would have to think about what exactly would the ratio be before I change sides. I mean, that would be something I have to think about a bit more. I couldn't just give a straight answer then, because obviously if it's like 100 times difference, I mean, I would choose Germany, but like as far as where between 1 and 100, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, but see, I wouldn't actually even choose the 100 times difference. So for me right now, I make about 25,000 a year. If you said to me, would I rather make $25 million a year, but I had to live in North Korea, me, like one of the top party dudes under Kim, or I can make 25,000 a year in Canada, that's 100 times difference. And there's no doubt in my mind, 100 of 100 times I'm picking Canada over North Korea.
And the other thing also is whether both wages are survival wages or not. Because of both wages, if it's like the difference between 50,000 and 50 million, I mean, you can still live with $50,000 then. So, I mean, there's other factors. You can still live with
25,000. You can still live with 25,000. You're not going to be rich. Like you'll have a Mercedes in Germany. You'll probably
if it's something where they're both livable income, then I'll choose.
No, I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
I'll choose the US and Canada then.
It's 70,000 versus 25,000 in today's money, but we're in the 60s. On 25,000 in today's money, you can still live in America. Plenty of people live in America on less than $10,000 a year. You have a used Ford in America in the 60s, but you have your freedoms, you have your rights, you can vote for your president, all that good stuff, and the cops can't just arrest you without giving you a fair trial and a warrant and all that shit. Versus in Germany, 70,000 a year, 70,000 a year. Except, you got your Mercedes, you got a decent house and everything. Except here's the thing. You can be disappeared in the night. If the state decides that you're a deviant or something, you're gone. If the state finds that you actually had Jewish heritage that you didn't even know about, you're gone. You're like, it's game over. Which would you rather live in? Because to me, even if it was 100 million a year, I know I might get purged under Hitler, in which case it's like asking, would you rather have 100 million if you're
Well,
dead?
if
It's
we
like,
can
well, take
establish
that.
the conditions that they're both livable incomes, I mean, I would choose America just because if you have a livable income in either, I
Well, it
think
depends.
America's
Livable.
better.
You'll be able to afford food. You'll have a studio apartment,
Yeah, I mean,
and
just
you'll have
like
a used
basic,
car.
like be able to afford food, water. I'm not talking about getting the newest sports car, just
Yeah.
getting your essential needs. I mean, yeah, I would pick
But
America.
here's the problem. Yeah, it shouldn't actually need all those caveats to it, because even if I told you it was 300,000 a year in Germany or 25,000 a year in America, you got to rule America. I mean,
Well, I said
how
if it's a livable income in America, I mean, if it's
well,
25,000, in which I mean, there are some
you're not
people in
going to
the
have any
U.S. that do
leftover
make
money.
25,000. I mean, I
You're
would
not
pick
gonna. You're
America.
basically, imagine working at McDonald's 30 hours a week today in Eastern Los Angeles. That's what you're gonna have. Versus you're in Hamburg, you're an engineer in Germany, and you make 70,000 a year. Except you have to live under National Socialism, and the other you have to live under liberal capitalism. Which would you rather live under?
I mean, well,
Like,
because at the McDonald's job, you could at least get by. I mean, I would choose America.
so I don't necessarily understand this whole thing about how, because you were talking about before how like people, they just care about having money and all this kind of stuff. They care about putting food on the table. In a country like America or Canada or the UK, we're like, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're starving to death, all you care about is food. That's true. You're not going to care about higher order philosophy. But for us capitalist democracies, we're so rich on the whole right now, we can actually afford to start caring about things like gay rights and things like social liberalization and women's liberalization and all this.
Well, I
These are
wouldn't say
actually
those
signs.
two
No, no, no.
coincide with
These
each
are
other.
actually signs of an advanced society that's rich enough to care about more important things than just surviving each day, like they do in the Soviet Union or they do where is it, like Turkey under Erdogan, for example. So
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would just say, as far as like a socially liberal society that's more prosperous, it's really only recently that America and Canada have become socially liberal. I mean, even the way they were in the 50s, it's quite different. And I mean, as they become socially liberal, median income for these countries, it hasn't really gone up for the average person. And
no,
in
but the
terms of
standard of
cost of
living's
goods,
gone up.
housing has gone up, college has gone up, healthcare has
But
gone
the
up.
standard of
Then
living's gone up though. Like
yeah,
you
I mean,
never
in
would have.
terms of the cost of goods, I mean, can people really say, like, because America relative to where it was in the 90s culturally, like, wow, we're so much better off today than, even though median incomes are around the same. And
But
like in turn,
okay,
society, it's willing to tolerate behavior where like individuals can just do whatever they want. They can get drunk, they can party, they can
yeah.
smoke.
That's
Who
worth money.
cares?
That's the American way, man. That's worth money. Like, isn't the American freedoms worth some amount of money
Well, it
as opposed?
depends what the freedom is. I mean, freedom to smoke pot, like, wow, that's so cool then.
Well, for some people it is. So for me, I actually support pot legalization, but I
Well,
oppose a
why?
lot of harder drug legalization. It's not that big of a deal to me because it doesn't really have any long-term adverse effects unless you're about 3%. If you have a predisposition to schizophrenia, which I do, for example, you have a 3% chance higher of developing schizophrenia if you smoke weed. So I don't smoke weed anymore after I found that out. But I used to smoke weed. It was never a big deal to me. I never had like a big psychedelic trip or anything. It just didn't do very much to me. But it was fun, smoke weed with the boys and shit like that and everything. Same with drinking and everything. These are things that you might take for granted, but understand you tried that in Taliban Afghanistan. You're going to be shot in a stadium, right?
The
So
thing
you're
is,
going
I
to be.
don't support is I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't support the legalization of pot then.
Well, you don't
And
sound
I don't
like
get
much
this
fun. You
argument
know,
of
you
like
don't sound like much fun, bro. You
that,
must be great at parties, bro.
that I mean, well, I mean your philosophy then is just life is a big party and like, just
Well,
indulge in
no,
all
it's
kinds of
not.
pleasures.
No, it's not. We got a lot of brutal dictatorships out there that need an ass kicking right now. Life is pretty good in Canada. I had the same chance of being born in Afghanistan as I did in Canada, man. Roughly equal population. I ain't gonna leave those people behind. I want world liberation. So
Well,
it
my
ain't a
question
party.
is like in the case of pot legalization, since this kind of ties into divorce in the sense of pot legalization. I mean, I want the state to make it illegal, but you want the state to make it legal. And similarly with divorce, it's still different, but like
What
it's
is
the idea
legal?
of the state enforcing morality, where I want the state to issue fines of around $10,000 who
Yeah,
get
so
divorced.
that they
You
can
just want
appeal
it to
to
be,
your
you just want to
morals.
do nothing.
No, no,
So
no,
my
no.
question
But
is,
your
why do you support the
morals,
legalization of pot?
yeah, no, your morals though. Why should your morals be forced down my throat? I don't believe in your morals around divorce. I
I
believe
mean,
in
well, is
feminism.
with your society, as far as let the chips fall where they may. I mean, you're going to have a society where people are going to use pot, people are going to get drunk, and like, I mean, is that really a prosperous society where
Um,
people?
it looks like Canada's doing pretty well right now. You compare us to Iran or Hungary, looks like we're kicking ass compared to these conservative shitholes. So
What I'm saying, if like the economic conditions were similar and society was
but
socially
they're
liberal
not,
or
because
socially
liberalism gives
conservative,
rise to economic
then
progress. Liberal countries kick ass economically because we respect everybody. We have an open society where the best can rise to the top, whereas there, only the men can go and work. So if you got a smart woman who might have invented something cool, guess what? She's got to stay in the kitchen and do shit. And
so I
so
guess my question then is like in the US, like, I mean, even in the 90s relative to today, I mean, at the time, a majority of Democrats, they didn't approve of gay marriage. Well, now the majority of Republicans do. However, median income really hasn't gone up, meaning that
no,
the
no, but
average
your
person's
standard of
income
living went up
relative to
though.
inflation
No, no,
hasn't
no,
gone up.
but there are diminishing returns, of course. But you say median income hasn't gone up. America's economy has grown
Relative to
exponentially.
inflation.
I'm not one of those people who doesn't care about the rich. I think rich people are badass by and large. I don't understand this populist move by conservatives lately to demonize the rich. The rich are the economic engine of our society, and honestly, we should learn from them. And I'm specifically talking about like productive rich people. Sure, you got people like Paris Hilton, but even Paris Hilton runs a business and everything. Even she's pretty productive. She's more productive than the average American these days, for example. But there was a time when she was just like a rich daughter who didn't do very much, and she became a meme. I'm not saying like idolize those people per se, but people like Elon Musk should be idolized. We should learn from them. We should be like, oh, that guy's cool. We should learn from people like Tim Apple, these other people that they manage great minds to do great things, and they drive our standard of living up. And so you talk about median income relatively stagnating amongst a certain portion of the economy. I got news: their access to technology, the cost of goods, what your money gets you actually goes further now, because what you're not taking into account is that you've got access to iPhones today. You've got access to sexual freedom today. You've got access to be who you feel you truly are in a way that you would have been humiliated or even brought to suicide for in the past. To me, that's worth money. To me, that you can put on an indifference curve, you can show that with economic financial utility, you can show that you can derive utility from non-monetary things. You can assign a utility value to, just as you could to a dollar. And so money isn't everything. It turns out actually living in a society where you can be who, not even who you want to be per se, who you actually are. Because if you're transgender or you're gay, you got no choice over that. It's a living hell in the society that you'd enforce on anybody. In my society, I'm not gay, but that doesn't mean that I feel that gay people, like my friend Arthur, for example, should live in basically what would amount to fascism for him and freedom for me. That sounds like bullshit. That sounds like garbage. And we're coming up on the end of the debate. I'll give you the opportunity to make your closing remarks. But what I'll say to you is I personally feel that you would be much happier living in a fascist country like Hungary or Iran than you would here personally. And you might want to look into Islam, because it sounds like there's a lot there that would appeal to you. You say you don't read scripture. You might like what they got to offer in the Quran. You might feel more at peace and don't have to worry about all those party bros with their weed and alcohol and women and stuff. So there we go. Anyway, feel free to make your closing remarks.
Okay, so I'll just say for my closing remarks, and this could just be for the debate in general, so it'll be a bit longer then. But as far as this point, I mean, I was just going to add that in terms of price of college relative to inflation, it's gone up. Price of healthcare has gone up. Price of housing has gone up. I mean, even price of rent and, I mean, college textbooks. So, I mean, when talking about the cost of living, then if anything, it's more burdensome for people as society has gotten more liberal. And to me, with liberalism, the main problem is as far as this idea of just let people party, let people get drunk, let people smoke pot. And, oh, what does the state have to do? That's enforcing morality. This idea of just letting the chips fall where they may, I don't think hundreds of millions of people as a whole can regulate themselves, simply because long term it's going to be worse for everyone if we just allow parents to smoke pot instead of saying, hey, like, you should take care of your kids more, and you're not allowed to do that then. So as far as the long run, I think it's better, like, if you do have some rules that people have to follow, instead of this idea of like, oh, life is just a big party and like have fun and all that. Because I mean, even with more material wealth, that doesn't make you necessarily more happy. And I would just say, in the case of World War I and World War II, like, there is the we keep like circling around, where my point is just saying, like, Germany is a lesser threat than Russia in both cases. And like in the case of Kevin, he either views them as both the same, or he sides with the communists. So thus he just views the conflict deciding with the small person to go after the big person, and kind of hopes that you're going to get leaders like Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush to save the day 40 years down the road when you have a Cold War with the other side. But at least for me, because I view one as a greater threat than the other, I mean, obviously I want to take out the greater threat then. So as far as World War I, World War II, and divorce, I mean, we got to all topics then, and I'll let Kevin give his closing statements.
Well, yeah. So there you go. This has been an interesting debate. To sum up my position on World War I, obviously Germany was a bigger threat than the Russians were. Yeah, I would have spent more money to also fight the Bolsheviks more properly, and yeah, would have meant going into a bigger debt for sure. But that's one of the few things that the government should ever spend money on is the military and countering our rivals. Because individuals can manage things like their own expenses and education and all that other shit. You don't need the government to do that. You can do it yourself. On fighting the Bolsheviks, you can't really do that yourself. So it's one of those things where the government has to be involved in, just like firefighters or police. And on the point about World War II, I want to be clear here. My position is that on the morals of it, communism and fascism are basically equal. On the actual security threat of which was a bigger danger to America in the long run, there's no doubt in my mind, had Germany won and we helped Germany, like the Cold War that comes up next with Germany and Japan is going to be far tougher and far, far more damaging than the Cold War with the Soviets, who were basically incompetent. And the only reason why they won was because America and the West helped them and to destroy the Nazis. And in my view, a Cold War with Nazi Germany would have seen them having the military advantage, them having the economic advantage, them having the missiles, them having the scientists. Remember, we're not going to get Werner von Braun to help with ICBMs here because he's going to be in Germany still helping the Nazis, which he's been working for from the V2 rockets and so on. We would be at a great disadvantage. And my view is that the Axis powers would have consolidated their hegemony and taken down America and her allies by the end of the 20th century, and that the world today would be an absolute nightmare. My opponent here would lead you to believe, I guess, that he would hope for strong leaders like Reagan and Bush that would fight that Cold War properly. I have my doubts as to whether or not he would even genuinely want America to win that one, but that's a topic for later. But what I will say here is that even if you did have Reagan, even if you did have Bush, even if you did have Kennedy, understand the Nazis, with their military prowess, their science base, and the industrial capability of the full population from Europe, from Portugal, all the way out to Siberia and all the way down into Asia with their ally in Japan, would see them have almost all the industry in the world, almost all the population in the world, almost all the scientists in the world, almost all the nukes in the world, and the only long-range missiles to deliver them. In other words, they could nuke the Americas, which is the last holdout of freedom, and America would not have anything but some bombers to fire back with, and they would win that if they decide to go nuclear. And that would be a very damaging thing. And my guess is Hitler or his son would have, his eventual son or whoever took over him, would have done a nuclear war with America. And so it would have seen the fascists probably win. And even if America did win, that would be a higher chance of us losing than getting the Soviets, who were economically incompetent. And so for me, they were morally equal, but the Soviets were less of a threat in the long run. So you got to help the Soviets against the bigger threat, which was the Nazis. Now, on the point about divorce, I think it's very clear here that there is more to life than money. I think being happy is important. I think finding the right partner is important. And I would say that a huge result of the divorce rates in America would be greatly abated if we were to do away with this shame culture and this abstinence culture that tries to deny human nature, much the same way as the communists try to deny human nature. You'll notice Christian conservatism and communism have a lot in common when it comes to people telling them, don't express your sexual desires, don't express your need for food, that kind of shit. They both deny human nature. And so for me, liberalism has a value to it. And I'm a straight white dude. You can imagine if I was, for example, a gay black dude, I might value my freedoms in, say, America or Canada even more, tremendously more. And so we can't reduce these things down to my median income or my debt rate. Those are memes from a great position of privilege. And so it's been an interesting debate. To everybody else watching out here, if you would like to challenge me as well as capitalist Neocon has done here, you can, of course, contact me on Twitter. My @ is Kevin Castley. DM me, and we can as well set up a debate. I welcome the debate. I'm not like Coward Crowder. I will debate anyone who steps into the ring. And so with that, thank you for watching, and I will have a post show very shortly. So thanks for tuning in.